Welcome to Now Let's Talk, the podcast with Vanessa Corwin and Kathleen Kahn, where we speak with our guests about the joys and challenges of life in today's world. Hello, I'm Vanessa Corwin.
And I'm Kathleen Kahn.
President Trump recently signed an executive order that addresses homelessness. Among other things, it promotes elimination of harm reduction and housing first approaches. It also encourages states to involuntarily commit homeless individuals who are determined to be mentally ill, substance abusers, or unable to care for themselves. Joining us today to look at the impact of this executive order is Deborah Padgett, professor, Silver School of Social Work at New York University. Welcome, Deborah. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Deborah, what exactly are harm reduction and housing first policies, and why are they being eliminated?
Okay, well, first I'll start with harm reduction because that existed before housing first. It's an approach to addiction in which you don't require absolute sobriety, you work with the person. It started in terms of recovery from drug abuse, substance abuse, where rather than, absolute requiring of being clean and sober, you actually work with the person, and it works, generally speaking.
You work with them to get them clean and
Yes.
sober. That's the
But
idea, right?
You don't force them, to do it. But once they're in a situation of trust, it tends to work much better. So when Housing First began in New York City in 1992, harm reduction was already kind of on the map. It had been not only in drug abuse, but also during the AIDS epidemic in terms of safe sex and so forth. So you minimize the harmful consequences without completely requiring complete sobriety and not using drugs or alcohol.
And housing first as well.
Yeah, I should say that harm reduction was a natural fit for Housing First and is one of the primary values in the approach, because it really reflects the Housing First tenets or philosophy about housing and treatment, which is you work with the consumer. They have choice, and you work with them on those choices. I think what's been so gratifying for me in my research is seeing in real time with real people how it works. And that's really my focus. We have plenty of randomized trial statistics showing that Housing First works, but I'm very much interested in the human level of what's it like to get housing, and also how do you deal with addiction, drinking problems, as well as serious mental illness. And that's really a primary focus of Housing First, is people with a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia.
So the idea is to get them into some kind of housing situation.
Yes.
So that they can then go into whatever treatment programs.
Yes. I think what's important about Housing First is that the person is guaranteed housing, and their behavior does not force them to be evicted. They may be evicted by the landlord, but the program stays with them. So what's really important is not only do you provide them with housing, but it's not housing only. And services that Housing First provide, to me, are what really makes the reality of housing come to full fruition, because the services are to help you with medications in case you do have a serious mental illness, or help you with the consequences with families, your family members, and so forth. And if addiction or drug use is a problem, also to help, but not to, have these strict requirements to keep your housing.
So then why do you think they're being eliminated, these programs, in this executive order?
President Trump, is, through his various people who represent him, has been very clear. He has accepted the message from billionaires who are really after Housing First and have spent a great deal of money and time on trying to eliminate it. They feel it's enabling substance abuse. They feel that Housing First is rewarding people rather than requiring them to earn their way into housing. And there is no question that in many of these cities, San Francisco in particular, but also New York, Homelessness is a problem, and people are living out of doors. And um, today, as a matter of fact, I think they're going to start the process of what Trump calls no more Mr. Nice Guy, which is somewhat ironic to me,
right?
but where they're going to do roundups, clearances.
We see enough homeless on the street. There's no question, especially in this city. So you just said how they're going to eliminate harm reduction,
Mm-hmm.
which makes the problem worse.
Right.
And now, is the police going to be the ones to deal with this? Not only in this city, but across the board, going to deal with this if they eliminate housing first.
Yeah. So to some extent, I think it's going to be very hard for them. And I can tell you one thing, it's going to be one thing I can be sure of. It's going to cost imminently much more than if you had housing first. And it will last with housing first. Whereas what he's doing or what he's proposing to do is round people up, clear out the encampments, and then take them to some undisclosed location.
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go.
Sound kind of eerily familiar to earlier in our history in barracks. And this is a place where people will be forbidden to use drugs and so forth. But when you see what he envisions, it's nothing but punishment or incarceration. So they're going to be taken outside of the city limits, forced into treatment. I honestly don't know who or how they're going to do this, to be honest, because we have billions invested in treatment programs and outreach and shelters and a lot of other things that aren't nearly as draconian as what he's saying he's going to enact. For me, it's like a nightmare scenario.
It is a nightmare.
It is.
Does he include, and I'm sure he does, the individuals that are disabled or mentally
Oh, yeah.
problems?
I mean,
how do they figure that out?
Well, let me give you a couple of statistics I think puts this a little bit into a clearer picture. Most homeless people are families in numbers. So if you're looking at typicality, it's usually a young mother with one or two children. But about 30%, give or take, are single adults with a serious mental illness and also often substance use. So in terms of sheer numbers, now people on the street, you don't see families. I will say that. It's pretty unusual, at least in the United States. But they are doubled up, or they go immediately into shelter so they don't live on the street. Of course, where they're put is often a very shabby motel, out by the airport or something. But you don't really see the majority of homeless people in these encampments. It's not really representative, let's say. But once they start rounding people up, at least 30%, if not more, are going to be suffering with a mental illness. A larger percent are probably using drugs and substances. But I always say you can't prove that that's not a result of homelessness rather than a cause of homelessness. We've interviewed folks in my research over their life histories, and for some of them, drugs were involved in their personal case of losing their housing. But generally speaking, drugs are so available in this city, in New York, around the country, that it's kind of hard if you're suffering living outside. You have to be alert.
Oh, yeah.
Every night. So we've had people tell us they don't want to take amphetamines or something, but they have to stay awake. Women to escape sexual assault, men to escape attacks, theft, and so forth. So sometimes it's almost a coping mechanism to use.
Wow. So some people might say that any efforts to get mentally ill people or substance abusers into some kind of treatment, could be a good thing. In fact, some governors and mayors, including our Mayor Adams, have actually implemented such policies. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, even more meaningful to me, because Adams, I think, sways in different directions, but is the governor of California.
Yes, Newsom, yeah.
Who's really made a pivot from being much more, compassionate about the homeless and so forth. But now maybe he's doing for the vote or for whatever reason, he is trying to enact laws forcing people to be involuntarily committed who are adjudicated to have a serious mental illness. This is a legal kind of decision. So we're seeing quite a quite a change around the country in attitudes, at least at the level of our political leadership. I think it's going to be very difficult, and I know we can talk further about the idea of involuntary commitment, because this is truly, I think, one of the most difficult conundrums for people who care about the homeless as well as people who don't, is how to help people. But I will generally go back to housing first, because my research over the past 20 years has been really focused on that. And I've seen it in real time help people overcome not only addictions or dependence, but also the worst of their mental illness, the symptoms, to really stabilize.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily any particular treatment as much as I think it's having the security of being indoors and not having this constant threat
Yeah.
of being outside. So I do put a lot of what I feel is proven research showing that people do better when housed.
When we were doing research about this subject,
Mhm.
back in, I think, the 70s, Geraldo Rivera with Willowbrook, was that
Yeah.
not the same thing we're talking about today?
Yes. Willowbrook, I think, really set in motion, a lot of interest in really radical change in terms of institutional settings. We had, following that, what we call deinstitutionalization. You probably heard that term, but it's literally was closing the vast majority of psychiatric hospitals
Mm.
because of abuse in those hospitals, using
Yeah.
these horrible therapies. And this has been going on for decades. It seemed more feasible to have community settings. And Willowbrook's an example of kind of giving the impetus to that.
Mhm.
And by the 80s, it is true that the idea of saving millions of dollars by closing these very expensive psychiatric hospitals, although New York State kept some open upstate because the workers' unions were very concerned about the closures. But by and large, much money was saved. However, sadly, it was not really put into community-based mental health services where people with a serious mental illness get the help they need without being virtually incarcerated and even subject to some very, very dangerous kinds of therapies, insulin shock, and
Mm.
all sorts of, experimental kinds of ways of dealing with this. We've learned a lot more since then. The homelessness in the 80s certainly included a disproportionate number of people with serious mental illness, still only about 30%. But it was largely the result of Reagan and the policies of the federal government beginning in the 80s to basically stop the building of public housing,
Hmm.
to cut back on what were already very successful, but also in short supply rental vouchers, originally called Section 8 rental vouchers.
Yes.
Well, Reagan basically said this should not be part of the government business to do this. So cut back dramatically on the availability of rental vouchers. These are vouchers that will pay a private landlord, and you will get housing in an apartment and only pay no more, I think, than 30% of any income that you do have. And public housing was basically frozen in time. That, you in New York City, you see nothing really that was built past the 70s, and built much earlier, than that, the buildings.
True.
So with this kind of relatively sudden ending of some of the best available ways for people to be housed who don't have large incomes, it was almost inevitable that people were going to end up out on the street. It's like a game of musical chairs. It was an inevitable outcome. There just wasn't enough housing for people of low incomes.
So you had mentioned these different services that the city provides for homeless people, and a city like New York, we rely very heavily on federal funding to support these services. So Gosh, what recourse do these individuals have?
New York City doesn't rely that much on
Oh,
federal funding for homeless services. And I just want to give you a statistic that I kind of knew, but it kind of blew me away when I saw it. New York City spends close to $4 billion per year just on homelessness,
wow.
DHS and so forth. That is the whole annual budget of HUD for homeless services, about 4 billion.
Mhm.
So the city spends as much as is allotted to the whole country.
Wow.
My goodness.
And I also want to say that I would guess no more than 25% of the 4 billion comes from federal sources.
Oh,
The
okay.
the vast majority comes from New York State and New York City. So that's it's still a lot of money, $4
Yes.
billion a year. And some of us question what we're getting for the money, in that, shelter, the right to shelter, you may or may not know, but it is legally guaranteed in this city, unlike anywhere else in the States, is an absolute guarantee. So for that, or whatever reason, New York went down the route of let's build more and more shelters. Every time the rates went up or the numbers went up, more shelters were either or built, or old buildings were redone to be shelters. So that's kind of the interesting, to me, a little bit of an irony that Housing First started here in New York City in 1992 and then spread from there. It's now in almost every country in Western Europe. We're going to have our first conference there this year. But it was kind of a lonely island in what was a huge, what I call a shelter industry
Hmm.
of $4 billion a year, going to the many, many hundreds of nonprofits there to help the homeless, a lot of money to private landlords. The monies have been broken down and we see how it's spent. My concern is that it doesn't end homelessness.
Right.
Just
Right. And
perpetuate.
I'm thinking what you're saying, since he's eliminated these two important policies, who's going to enforce this?
I completely, that's what gets me so perplexed at times, is how do we get off this merry-go-round, so to speak, that is predicated on providing, legally needing to provide shelter, but even allocating some of those $4 billion a year to Housing First programs. And some agencies, programs in the city are pretty close to doing what I call Housing First, but not so much. I mean, there are different ways that you can stay kind of faithful to the model, like harm reduction and so
Mhm.
forth. But it's really hard to change course when we have 30 years of rapidly expanding funding for shelters. And I am a little concerned that the people that benefit are not only the people who earn incomes, which is very sympathetic. People must work to keep the shelters open and guarded and provide food and services and so forth. But there are a lot of wealthy interests who benefit from this system as
Yes.
well. Private landlords,
Yeah.
developers who get incredible tax advantages, promising that lower, at least somewhat lower income families will get some of the units, rarely coming through with that.
Mm.
Sadly, it's a system in the city. I mean, I don't want to say that shelters do nothing, because, the vast majority of our homeless people are in shelters, something like 90,000 people. And on the streets are, I'd have to check the numbers, but it's probably no more than 5,000. So compare that to California, where it's the opposite. Very, very few people in shelters. That's
Right.
not the route they chose to go, but a lot of people outside,
Hmm.
living outside in Oregon and Washington. And this is where a lot of the impetus to not go the route. Some of us hope they won't go the route of shelter industry, but there are plenty of conservative voices and some faith-based organizations, so forth, who would prefer to go to what now you might call this model of incarceration outside of the city and enforced sobriety and so forth. I mean, I mean, it doesn't take much to predict this isn't going to work.
And it's only going to increase the homelessness,
Yes.
it
And
looks
the
like.
thing that kills me is that he is quick to eliminate. What's the next step?
And where, when you look at the alternatives to Housing First, you can break it down almost any way. They're more expensive because
Of course.
these individuals are going to leave. Somehow they're going to escape these carceral
Yes.
institutions. And once they're out, they may be put in jail for a night. They may go to an emergency room multiple times. They may have to spend time, in a hospital, so forth. These are very expensive ways of being homeless. And that, again, I go back to what he's proposing is going to cost a lot of money to enforce
Yes.
these camps,
Yes.
basically, or internments. And it's going to take personnel, and it's going to be a lot of like prison.
Yes.
Exactly.
It sounds very much like that.
Mhm.
So in this climate of reduced services and opportunities for housing and treatment, what recourse do these individuals have?
That's a very good question. I mean, I'll give you the answer here in New York is the Coalition for the Homeless is very helpful. They have hotlines and they can really help you. The city has a program for free legal advice if you are facing eviction. So why not prevent homelessness, right? At that critical moment when a family is facing eviction and near certain homelessness. So, landlords come with attorneys and they always win. But in the few cases, the only problem with that program is it's been a little slow starting up. And I think partly because it's harder to find attorneys to do that kind of work. I mean, the Legal Aid Society has been tremendously helpful. So what do? If they, most of them are in the shelters. So men have to go through the Bellevue hospital shelter. Women have to go to a shelter in Brooklyn. It's one central intake place. And then families have an intake center in the Bronx. So once you enter yourself into that system, you work at best yourself what we call up the staircase, where you earn the right to get more and more into independent housing. These are mainly for single adults. Families, as I said, usually get housed, but not necessarily in very good conditions and temporary, crowded. None of the shelters are known for very good. It's not like there's on the street, there's like, oh, that shelter is a good one. That's one of the few. No, I don't know of any good city-run shelters. I mean,
We've heard for years, I'd rather be on the street than go to a shelter.
A lot of folks,
They're
say
afraid.
that.
yeah, we have an article about that. We actually went out and interviewed people throughout much of Manhattan, and that was what they would say. Actually, many of them had already been in the shelter and knew what they had to get away from.
Wow.
And then during COVID, that gave us a little bit of hope that all these empty hotels could be converted. They've done that a little bit, but basically the city has closed those options even before the federal FEMA monies ran out, and have gone back to these shelters. I think it's in part because they owe these landlords 20-year leases and that kind of thing. So we're almost kind of rooted into this model.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now you just mentioned a couple of resources that people could go to learn more or to get some help. Are there any others that you think are worthwhile?
There is an organization called Shout New York at shoutnyc.org. And it is run by people who have been homeless, and generally people who have a psychiatric disability. And they're very good at advocating on behalf. And their website is full of incredibly helpful resources for people who are searching for help. I think I will mention rental vouchers are really the answer in most cases, particularly for families. The research has shown that. And to the city's credit, they have, not only do we have the federal, hopefully for the time being, Section 8 vouchers, but the city also funds FEPS vouchers. which are similar in that they pay the rent for that person. And it's pretty open-ended. If you have any income, they ask for 30%. But it really is the way out of homelessness for families, is to get a rental voucher. But I just heard last week, I think it was, that the city, for the first time in quite a long time, announced they were going to open up applications for city vouchers, rental vouchers. 600,000 applications.
My God.
Wow.
Almost overnight.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine? I mean, the need nationally, we estimate that for every Section 8 voucher, there's 1 out of 5 people get it. But we
Wow.
still got, 80% do not, even though they're eligible.
Right.
So it's incredible need. And
Oh,
I mean, it's good to have something, but 600,000 people,
yeah.
it's
That's amazing. I mean, it's not surprising when you think about it. It's pretty
I actually didn't
amazing.
think it would be that much, to be honest. I had thought that the growth of the FEPS program would have put a bigger dent. If anything, you look around and you see that buildings are going up everywhere,
Yes.
but they're not affordable housing. And
No way.
I
No
think
way.
the vacancy rate for affordable housing right now is under 1%.
Oh, that totally makes sense. Now, do you have any idea when these cuts and changes in these policies are supposed to take effect?
Well, I can say that Trump issued an executive order, and it was a very clear statement that for any locality to get federal funds, they will have to stipulate, and how they demonstrate this, I don't know, but they'll have to say that they're not using Housing First. They are requiring sobriety. So it's just kind of flip the script. How that's enforced, I don't really know. And I think people
I don't think they do either.
No, I don't either. I mean, I think you're right. You're right. They're just going to ordain this and then expect people to figure out how to do it. But they're very clear that no agency, no program, no local continuum of care will get federal funds if the Housing First is out. You can't see those two words. It's just not allowed. So if I were doing that, if I were head of a program, I'd probably just scrub Housing First off my website and try to keep doing as much as possible under the circumstances. But I suspect, given all the support by these very wealthy billionaires to do this, that they're going to be monitoring, find ways. They work with state legislatures, for example. I fear there's going to be enough enforcement, shall we say, to make it very difficult.
Yeah. And you, again, to your knowledge, you don't know when these are supposed to take effect, these changes?
To my knowledge, it wasn't mentioned in the executive order.
Yeah.
And I just want to add that, the Supreme Court's already given him free rein in a recent decision last June. The Grants Pass case. Basically, much to our disappointment, the Supreme Court ruled that localities can put people in jail for homelessness, basically. Before that, they had to show that, that there was a shelter bed and the person refused it, or they would be. But now it's for any reason, they can go into these encampments and give them citations, put them in jail, whatever.
Which is also, in the end, going to be very expensive.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the one constant thread you pull through all of this and I'm glad you said that. Everything that's proposed, other than Housing First, is more expensive, almost to the point of being mind-boggling, I guess is what I would say. We're already spending $4 billion a year. If you have to pay for incarceration facilities, and there are companies, by the way, that these billionaires are affiliated with that do run private prison services.
Oh, yeah.
New technology. It's called Palantir, is one of the companies. So there's some profits to be made by these changes, but I honestly don't know. I think they're just going to put it out there and expect the organizations to prove they're doing it before the money's allocated. I've done enough research and talking to people over the years that when you see how they can change for the better and you know that that can happen and their symptoms really get less intrusive sometimes as they grow older. But many people told us their stories of how they became clean and sober, and it wasn't a program. It was just kind of this existential decision of, I want to live.
Exactly.
Mm.
And I am going to take my recovery in my own hands. To see it's possible makes it even harder to take this,
Yes.
to see it personified in individuals. Not everybody, it's a 80 to 90% success rate for Housing First.
Well, that still sounds like a pretty good rate.
I was just you got my punchline. I was just getting ready to say, I'm in, the world of human behavior and social work and services. That's a really good success.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
think of anything else
Yeah.
that comes in at 90%.
Lord.
So yes, it's even more disheartening to see something that works and is personified in people having better lives and then being taken away.
That is absolutely the case. Well, Deborah, this has been an amazing, enlightening conversation. Well,
Yes.
and thank you so much.
I'm proud to be here. Thank you for
Thank
inviting
you.
me.
Pleasure is ours. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit our website at nowletstalkthepodcast.com and send us your comments and questions. We'll see you next time.